Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this beautiful fall day. So, Third Way is really focused on making sure that more students can get a quality degree or credential, because we know that now that's one of the best ways to set folks up for success in our new economy. And we're really excited today about this conversation because what could possibly be more exciting than higher education data? Right? That's why you're all here too, so you think it's exciting. This is actually the start of a three-part series that we'll be doing on higher education data, because we think it's one of the most promising ways to help students better identify institutions that have good outcomes and to help improve those outcomes across a whole variety of institutions. So we thought we would follow the data through the journey of a student. And we're going to start today at the beginning of the higher education journey that a student might take and when they're selecting an institution that they might want to attend. So we'll have a great conversation about that today, and then you can come back next month. We're going to have a conversation about how to use higher education data to help improve outcomes when you are already enrolled. And then the third one will be on connecting workforce and that higher education conversation. So we will follow all the way through, but we're going to start at the beginning today. And I will just let you know we are live streaming this conversation, and we will also be having the conversation virtually. So if you want to follow the conversation on Twitter, you can use #HigherEdData. And we will retweet things that you're saying and try to get that into the conversation as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Third Way's Senior Policy Advisor and Higher Education Campaign Manager, Tamara Heiler, to take us the rest of the way through. Tamara?
Thanks, Lene, and thanks everybody for coming. Really excited to be here today and have this conversation. As somebody who actually started my career in the K-12 space, it's always fun when the K-12 and higher ed worlds can collide. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to have one of those discussions. So we want to make sure we're leaving as much time as possible at the end to have this be an interactive discussion with the audience. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in, but let me first introduce you to the esteemed panel that we have. You should all have bio sheets on your chairs with more extensive information about their backgrounds, but I'll do a quick introduction. So to my left is Richard Barth, who is the CEO of the KIPP Foundation, which oversees the KIPP network of charter schools, which actually serves over 80,000 students with 12,000 alumni across 200 different schools across the U.S. Next to him, we have Aaron Bebo, who is the Deputy Chief of the College and Career Education Division at DC Public Schools here in DC. And then at the end, we have Cheryl Oldham, who is the Vice President of Education Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. To go ahead and get started, I think that we can all agree that over the last few decades, this country has made great strides when it comes to actually increasing access for students. We have more students actually graduating from high school today. We have more students entering into some sort of post-secondary option. But while we've done a really good job of getting students to college, I still think that there are some middling results when it comes to actually helping those students finish and graduate. According to federal data, we know that only around 6 in 10 first-time, full-time students who start college are actually finishing. But it should be noted that this system is broad, and so within that system, we have varying institutions or programs that are getting wildly different outcomes for the same student population. So based on that information, I'd love for each of you to sort of kick off this conversation by talking a little bit about what are you working on or what are you doing to help students make more informed decisions about their post-secondary options so that they're actually ending up at institutions that are going to help them succeed? So Richard, do you want to kick this conversation off?
Sure, and first of all, I'm so excited we're having this discussion. It is such an important topic, and I just keep emphasizing a couple things whenever we get a chance to talk about it. The first is, what we're all trying to grapple with is what are the talent solutions for the future of the country? There's amazing talent everywhere, and are we thinking about this in as intentional way as we should? And second point I'd emphasize is, how are we thinking about this, not even as much as I love the topic of the panel, that we really have to think about this as a K-16 arena and not, elementary, middle, high school, and college. Every time we fall into that trap, someone has someone else to point a finger at and say, well, if middle school did their job, high school would be fine. And higher ed then gets to say, well, if high schools did their job, we'd be fine. So with those two big things, it's such an important topic. I'd say our big learnings, about 5 years ago, we published our first ever, the college completion report, where we tracked all of our original alumni. And we tracked everyone from 8th grade on. So I want to emphasize, not just our graduating seniors, but our 8th graders. And we said, well, how did they do? And what we discovered is roughly 35% of our alums had a BA degree. And we were disheartened because our whole idea at KIPP from the very beginning was preparing kids to climb the mountain to college and a lifetime of opportunity. And what was more interesting is we said, well, how did we get here? And what we ended up discovering is if we went back in time and we looked at what happened to those original 8th graders, how many of them went to college, and which college did they go to? And we looked 10 years back and we predicted based on where they went, it said 35% would get BA degrees. No joke, literally. So we said, wow, this is sort of wild. Now, the bad news, it was not where we want to be. The good news was we realized we had insight that we could act upon. So we shared that with all of our regions across the country. We said, let's get at this. Let me combine that with a quick personal story. Around that time, I was visiting our schools in Austin, Texas, our high school, and I met a young KIPPster. When young, she was a senior, and I asked her what she was up to, and she's applying. She said, I'm applying to 2 colleges. I'm applying to Harvard and Austin Community College. And I said, I'm so glad you're applying. That's that's an interesting choice of 2 schools. And we began to realize that we, on our own watch, weren't doing what we needed to do. So the few things we've been doing since then is we built out a system where, we have it's nothing anyone can't do. We have a data system informed by the publicly available data, and then how our KIPPsters do on campuses. So now, when you're a junior at KIPP and you sit down with a counselor, you start with a list, a wish list that's customized based on your GPA, based on your test scores. So you start with that wish list. You're not obligated to apply to those schools, but we've actually identified them. And the big push is to make sure our kids apply to college the way middle-class affluent kids do. And so we want them to apply to at least 6 schools, 2 stretch, 2 that you'd probably view as the sweet spot, and 2 is what you're likely to get into, the right mix. In the class of 2014, 14% of our seniors did that. Last year's class, 73% of our seniors did that. So this is what we've been able to do in 4 years. I want to emphasize blocking and tackling, blocking and tackling. We're tracking this every week. The next thing we need to make sure you do is, are you starting off with the right list? Are you then applying the right list? Then are you getting your FAFSA in on time? We track that using all the data that everyone, publicly available data, or do you have all so you're ready for your aid? And then you have the decision-making period. And I would say, if you said, what's our next 2 biggest pain points? Happy to talk more. One is, you've got the right list to start, you apply to the right mix, you take care of your financial aid, and then when it comes to decision-making, do you pick the right school? And to date, 40% of KIPP seniors end up choosing still a school whose completion rates are 10 points below another one to which they've been admitted. And happy to talk about it. There's a lot of that has to do with financing. So we got to make sure they make the right choice at the end, and then you got to make sure they actually show up freshman year. Those are the things we're focused on right now. Right application mix. So when you have your financial aid in, you make the right, hopefully the best call for you if you have more than one choice, and then you show up freshman year.
Erin?
Yeah. First of all, I would say that we have learned a lot from the KIPP model and sort of have tried to draw best practices to the extent that we can. And so that has been a great partnership. The focus of our work at DCPS is all around the concept of making smart college choices. We literally have I'll wave it around, a guide to making smart college choices. Our initiatives are all centered around what we call a Smart College Choices campaign. I'll go specifically into one component of that, and that is the data-driven component. When we looked at our data, and we were able to drill down granularly into how DCPS students specifically were doing in colleges, not the national data that's available, the institutional data, and we were really inspired by the work of the EdTrust College Results Online, how they break it down, underrepresented minority, other sort of subgroups. We drilled down even more than that to see how were DCPS students doing. And that had not been done before at our district level. And what we found was unbelievable in ways that, literally unbelievable, in ways that we expected and in ways that we didn't expect. The data sometimes aligned with the national trends, but a lot of times it didn't. And we found, I'll give you an example, this is infamous now, College A and College B. So I guarantee, this group will have heard of both colleges, right? You're a smart, sort of college-savvy crowd. But you've definitely heard of College B. If you were to recommend to your niece or nephew, auntie, uncle, should I go to College A or College B? You'd say College B, I'd bet you a donut, and you would feel that you are doing so informed by good data and by what you know. Like, literally guarantee you. Like, find me somebody who would say College A, and I would say that's just not true, unless you're an alumnus of that school. However, when we drilled down, right, the DCPS graduation rates to the College A, which is less known, was 85% graduation rate. College B, our graduation rate was 31%. That's bonkers, right? And if you bear that out, and that's kind of an extreme example, but not the only one that we have. That's not like just one outlier that I like to tell to bear out the point. There are many more like that, a little bit less extreme, but that's a 50 percentage point plus split, right? So there's a lot of room in there for other stories that are less extreme, but still pretty serious. And you play it out with this, if the student is our unit of change, right? And you say, you have one teacher who is just recommending in total good faith school B over school A. And then you multiply that over and over and over again in one graduating class of 2,000 students, two graduating classes, 3, 4, and the ripples and the likelihood of their actual graduation, that has a very sobering effect, right? And so we thought, what do we want to do without damning any schools, without shaming any schools, with using this as an empowerment tool, right? And so we take a sort of we go high approach to this work. And so basically what it is when we have college expos, we have them at our individual schools. We're not really fans of the sort of, cattle call fairs that are prevalent. We only invite schools that we've deemed smart college choice schools. And so students from 9 to 12 and their parents are invited to that. That exposes them to schools only at which they are likely to do well based on our data. When we fund college tours, you can only use that money to go to visit a smart college choices school. And it's an amazing teachable moment because at the beginning, less so now, as Richard was saying, that the learning is really quick and people are so hungry for this data, right? So our team would get calls and folks would say, oh, I want to go to school blah, 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 right? And we'd say, oh gosh, only about 20% of our students are graduating within 6 years. You're not going to use our money for that visit. However, here are 3 schools in that geographic area with similar admissions sort of standards with 40, 50, 60% graduation rates. We'll fund those. And their first reaction was like, wait, what? The graduation rate is so low. I didn't think that was the case. How do you? And they have this learning opportunity, and then they're sort of realizing that it's not because everybody's knee-jerk reaction. This is another thing. Very common knee-jerk reaction is, okay, smart college choices. Let me see this list, and it's only going to be top-tier schools. No, it's not. You'll find schools that have sort of your average and even sort of pretty generous, pretty wide open admissions requirements that are just very committed to serving students well. I have yet to encounter a school, and we'll reach out to these schools, I've yet to encounter a college that we have deemed a smart college choices school and have that leadership say, really? Of course they're no. Like, usually from like the provost, VP, president, in that sort of echelon of leadership, they have made a commitment through aid packaging, through their sort of admissions. They are committed to admit and enroll a certain number of cohort of students from districts like ours, from KIPS. And the third thing that they'll usually do, and usually you'll see that happen together, is that they will provide intervention supports and programs such that when students get into those schools, they wrap their arms around them and do not let them fail through academic interventions, through social and emotional supports and opportunities. And so, again, there's usually few surprises. And then we partner with those schools very regularly because they very much want us to be evangelizing them and see our students succeeding there.
Carol?
So it's really fun to be here with these guys because they're like on the ground and working with students, and I feel like we're just sort of up in this policy and space. But at the Chamber, we're the largest organization representing the interests of business in the country, over 3 million members, state and local chambers of commerce all over the country, American chambers of commerce abroad. So we're in a lot of places, and we are really focused on how do we close that people-jobs gap. Lots of jobs, lots of people without jobs, and how do we close that gap? And one of the biggest things, my background, I spent some time at the Department of Education in another life, and I was involved in a commission called the Future of Higher Education, Spellings Commission, Future of Higher Education. And one of the big things that we talked about in that commission, and actually one of the most contentious issues, was this issue around data in higher education and the lack of data in higher education, and the fact that, some in traditional higher education will try their hardest to make sure that we never get that level of transparency about outcomes in higher education. And so it's been a personal, I guess, a little bit of a passion for mine. And then when I went to the Chamber, we started getting involved in more higher education out of necessity. We've got employers who tell us every day we are not happy with the outcomes of graduates of higher education. We got a lot of people that are actually completing higher education that are unemployed and underemployed. And so what's going on about the quality of that education? But then we're also very involved in sort of K through 12 issues and reform, and very focused with the civil rights community on how do we make sure that underrepresented students are getting the education that they deserve. And so we have been vocal advocates for more data and transparency in higher education. And then on the foundation side, so I work on the Chamber side, but I also have a role in the foundation, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, where we do a lot of programming. And we developed this program called Launch My Career, and it's a partnership of Gallup and American Institutes for Research. We partner with some chambers in a handful of states. We're only in a handful of states because we're only in a few states where you can actually get the level of data that we want for this tool. And it's a web tool, and it basically identifies the hot jobs in a region, the skills required for those jobs, and the institutions that provide you a best return on your investment to get that level, that education and that training to get those jobs. And some of the interesting things, so we're in Tennessee, Colorado, Texas, and just launched in Florida. And really, those are, there's probably maybe 4 other states in the country, I think, that actually have that level of data and that are willing, actually I should say, everyone has that data. It's, do they want to make it public? Okay. Do they want to share that and make that information public? So, and I think one of the unique things about our tool is that it is program level data. So that institution level data is important, right? It's great to know how college X, what their completion rates and all of that are. But what we've discovered in partnering with AIR is that it's oftentimes more important what you study than where you study sometimes. So you can look at an institution and you can look beneath that at the program that you might choose and the program that you would study and see wide-ranging differences in completion and success out of various programs. And so we're agnostic about the choices that you make, but we feel like you should be given the information to make those choices. And so, it's a web tool. And so with that comes, it's only as good as the people who use it. And so what we've really been trying to do more and more is how do we get this into the hands of high school students, and so that they really get to start playing with it and and digging into the information that's available. And it's hard because people do make choices based on lots of reasons. And so just because you provide them more and better data doesn't always mean they're going to make the great choices, but it's why these examples are so important, because they really need to have that guidance. But then they also have to have the information. So we're just trying to kind of provide that as a resource, but to also make this point to policymakers and others, and very willing partners in these states to be a part of this effort, because they really want to make this point to policymakers about funding of these institutions, about resources that go into it, about financial aid and other things. I mean, we are investing a massive amount in higher education, and based on very little data when making those decisions.
Great. So this actually leads nicely into my next question, and I think you all sort of alluded to this in your first responses, that so often kids are making decisions about, it's going to be one of the most expensive decisions they ever make in their lives, one of the most time-consuming and costly, but they're doing so based on anecdotal evidence or things like where their uncle went, or even using resources like U.S. News and World Report, which I know has some critics out there because of the types of input data or measures that they're looking at to base that ranking system. So could each of you just quickly sort of talk a little bit more about exactly what points of data or what metrics do you think are the most important for students to look at before they actually make the decision? So, for example, how do you help students pick the colleges that go on that wish list? Or what are the data points you're looking at to decide if this school is a smart college or not? Or, the types of data you're including in your Launch My Career tool. So I'll throw that to anyone that wants to start.
Jump in.
No, I was just going to give one example of, so we field tested this tool with some students, and it's just a little anecdotal story about the sort of choices and the data necessary. We had a gal in Colorado who would have been a first-generation college goer, was using the tool and playing around on it, passionate about music, and wanted to be a music major, which was fantastic. Sort of looking around and looking at various, programs that she might, and realizing that the outcomes for those particular programs weren't going to give her potentially a lot of success in terms of income. And income's one measure. I think it's an important measure. It's not the end all be all. But when we drilled down a little bit more with her, it became clear that her issue was, yes, she was a first-generation college goer, and oh, by the way, her family was going to be relying on her to actually support them. I mean, she sort of either perceived or not, that was her reality, and that was the pressure that she felt. It was that I need to make the right choices, and I need to be successful, and because I have a lot of obligations to my family. And so as she was digging around and talking through it more, it became clear that, and so then she started sort of rethinking, right? Well, maybe I'll be a business major, and then I'll do something in music, and I'll minor in music, and that'll be my passion on the side. It was just sort of helping to rethink, like, what do I really want to do, and what do I need to do for my life circumstances? So I think, income is one of the outcome metrics for our tool, and it's certainly not the end-all be-all, but I think it's a consideration that folks ought to at least have access to.
I would say a handful of metrics. One is as you, Richard, were talking about, I think the sort of a typical admissions standards, and again, getting as granular as you can get. There are, and this is a whole other conversation for a whole other day, but there are sort of data sharing limitations to what we can share publicly. So would I love to sort of pop this up on a poster and wave it around DC? Yes. Can I? No. My team member is laughing. She's like, watch yourself. We want to keep that National Student Clearinghouse contract. Who said that? So we are able to share with our school staff what some of that granular data looks like. Like, again, school institutions will post their average SAT and GPA. We find that, again, those numbers typically look different for DCPS, right? So if we are able to empower our college and career coordinators and our counselors with that information, a student and their family is a little bit clearer on, oh, wow, that's actually a very different sort of threshold, and I could maybe get into that school. Maybe I can, maybe that is within my reach. So again, GPA, SAT, as granular as you can get, right? And that is going to depend a lot on your district or on your sort of charter network and if they have access to that at that level of granularity. Certainly grad rate, and if you are a Pell recipient, absolutely look at that Pell grad rate. Certainly if you have the grad rate for your school or your district, that is helpful as well. 3 more things, 2 of which are quantitative, 1 of which is not. The average financial aid gap for somebody in your sort of Pell, not Pell group, again, as granular as you can get. We in DC are really lucky to have a DC TAG grant, which in its sort of initial years was designed to close the gap between in-state and out-of-state tuition. Now it does a very fine job of trying to get there, but does not. It's up to $10,000 for out-of-state publics. So again, looking at that as granularly as you can get, when we look at our data versus sort of data of the average Pell recipient student, our students tend to, because of that tag, have a smaller gap, which is good, and that's something that they should be considering. One thing that we find is that students will stop thinking about schools even before they do that analysis with the classic sticker shock of, oh my God, I can never afford what it says on that website. We're like, no. We designed a tool for them to walk through with them and their families to see what the average aid package is for institutions and what the average gap is. And for many of our students, it gets them to a place where they feel a lot more comfortable about pursuing that. Last 2, certainly some just demographics. For many of our students, if they belong to a sort of subgroup, whether that's Pell eligible, whether that's students of color, underrepresented minorities, they want to know what the proportion of the school population is. And so I think that that's a really important metric to look at. And the last is totally sort of qualitative gut, and that's we really recommend students getting on campuses, especially for students who will be first generation. They have a vision of what college is in their mind, and unfortunately that vision usually does not, A, it's usually not correct, and B, it usually does not involve them fitting in and succeeding. And so when we have students get onto college campuses, ideally in dual enrollment courses, we've got some great partnerships with institutions here in DC, but then also on our college tours that we've been doing, that vision starts to shatter and be replaced by one in which they are succeeding, they are there, and they get to know, gosh, I thought I really did want a large school. I do not like this. This is too big for me. And it's really important for them to learn that themselves, and that's nothing that they could learn in a book or in some, through data.
Be comprehensive. I mean, I think maybe the question that's worth than asking would be, we're getting so much better with having all this data available. Why isn't it just a home run every time?
Yeah.
So I think that's like the part people often don't want to talk about, but I'd say it's really hard. So if we actually went under the hood and said, we have all this data, so is everyone going to the right college? The answer is no. So, so first of all, anyone who's got a kid, I had a kid who's now a freshman in college, he had all the data available to him. If it were not for his parents, he wouldn't have gotten an application in, literally. He barely did. And he was a fine student. So this is not like some drama case. Like, he's a fine student, but still, getting a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old to submit a college application on time, if you hung out with teenagers, it's not for every kid an easy, no-brainer. Getting them to do it multiple times. You could have all the data in the world. So you do have to have this force of adults who are amazing at relationships, amazing at making connections, amazing at working through all the issues in the world. And then that's compounded by the fact that when we're talking about first-gen kids and kids, I'm sure in DCPS and Kipsters, they got a lot going on, and this is just one more thing as a junior or senior in high school. So I say this not to put a pall on anything, but I want to make sure we recognize the power of data is immense, and we are unleashing it, and it's so exciting. And I agree. And I think I would say that the genie's out. Like, people may try to, protect having data become available, but it's going to be everywhere. It's already in places that just didn't even imagine a couple of years ago in terms of people having access to this. But I then think it's about relationships where you have adults who care a lot and are going to work with kids to say, look, here's a good starting list. Let's work through what your issues are. So then what are the issues we're into? We're not, I'll tell you things that we got to get to next level of improvements. We haven't tapped into, I think, the income issues. That's a big one. 2, in terms of so not just where you go to college, but more so, what is your major going to be? And if that's your major, which college is the right one for you? 2, EDEA. Every affluent kid, if you're going to a school that's more selective and above, half the class is done by New Year's. Money's taken up, athletes are taken up, legacies are taken up, high net worth people taken up. So we got a pie where everyone's competing for the second half. Our kids are not applying to ED at the rates they need to be. So now we got to do that. It took us 4 years to have kids go from 15% of our kids apply to 6 schools to 77%, right? 4 years to get there. Now we got to get that better. That's a relational thing too, because there's a risk involved in saying I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket and I'm not sure. And if you come from an environment where that confidence of like, I'm sure this is where I want to go because I've been to it multiple times, or like to get there by September of your senior year is a big push for that group of kids. And then there's a relational piece, say, for kids who want to leave home. So most kids will go to school within 200 miles of home, and it's fantastic. But many of our kids have opportunities to go elsewhere. We've not done enough, I would say, speaking for KIPP. We have to keep getting better at saying, okay, how are we engaging with parents and families well before to get them acclimated to the possibility that their child may want to go elsewhere. Right. So a prime example of this, it's always helpful. We had the president of Franklin and Marshall. We have 90 KIPP college partners. And 1 in 4 Kipsters goes to college on a college partner campus. When you apply, when you're going through your senior year and you're looking at your schools, and your wish list comes up, your recommended wish list, partners show up in a different color. So Franklin and Marshall is one of our partners. A couple of years ago, the college president, Dan Porterfield, calls me and he says, we have 7 Kipsters, freshman class, or 8, I think it was. He said, 6 are crushing it. 1 is struggling a bit academically, but we think they'll make it. 1, crushing it academically, varsity soccer player. Parents call or text every day and say, when are you coming home? That's our fault, because we didn't do a good job preparing that family for like a massive change in their life and someone who's going to be, 2,000 miles away. So I say all this because you have all the data, you're getting this all right, and then you have real life happen, and you need unbelievably committed adults who are going to work through that over the course of multiple years, including teachers, to get the job done. The payoff is immense, but I want to emphasize this because we could say, wow, if we just had the database, we could nail this, and we all are building databases. Yeah. But there's a lot going on beyond that, and as people do Q&A, I just want to encourage us to think about what are those other issues that even when you think you got the system built perfectly, prevent you from hitting the promised land.
No, that's exactly right.
So I have time for just one more quick question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you all to join this conversation. Since integrating a more sort of data-informed approach to this process, does anyone want to share any of the sort of changes or successes that you've already seen that's provided the biggest benefit to your students?
Yeah, I will start. We have made a DCPS. I don't think this is a DCPS term, but we just say what gets measured gets done, right? And so once we were able to sort of measure this, we were able to demonstrate growth and movement to our leadership. And Richard is exactly right when he's talking about there being so many efforts needed by humans to act on that data in very, what I would call, intrusive and proactive and early on, and then continue, so at least 9th grade start onwards. And so one of the ways in which that's manifested itself at DCPS is we've started a college and career coordinator initiative. It started out at 3 of our high schools, 3 of our highest need high schools, east of the river in Anacostia. Basically it is one human being, one coordinator, with a very, very robust, highly scripted scope and sequence to ensure that the adults in the building and the students in the building are doing everything that they should be doing to meet whatever their post-secondary goal is. And within the model, it is totally okay if you want to do if you got a 4-year plan, if you got a 2-year plan, if you got a work plan. And those students with the career plan, the career-bound students, they are held onto perhaps even more tightly than the college-bound students are, because very often in urban school districts, those students are just sort of released and told, good luck to you. When I used to live in Massachusetts, good luck to you in the Red Sox, but that's not really applicable anymore. But so the idea is that all of those students have a post-secondary plan that is tailored to them, that has their voice sort of being the driver in it. Like, I want to go to college. I want to go to a 2-year college. But then some counseling sessions to say, okay, well, let's look, your GPA is actually pretty high and you got a pretty good SAT score. Like, why do you know, and so then maybe it will pivot to a 4-year. Nobody's talked to them about that before, right? And then they're getting these supports if they're career bound. And so again, those positions, and we at central office are holding ourselves to account, and we have the data to track that. Our SAT participation rates and scores going up in these schools. Our FAFSA completion rates going up in these schools. Our college application rates going up, and not just, you have to be very careful as a district about creating goals with perverse incentives, right? Not just the application rate, but how many schools are the students applying to? Are they smart college choices schools? And are we seeing that go up? And such that it's not just, it's very easy to like plop a bunch of students into a classroom and say like, okay, fill out an application to, you know, a community college and like, hooray, we got 100%. Like, that's not entirely what we're looking for. We're looking for something that is deeper and more meaningful to that. And so what we've seen pretty conclusively overall is, yes, those things are going up when you put an adult in the building to coordinate that effort. And so as a result, we've tripled it just this year, such that 9 of our high schools now have college and career coordinators. There's a huge parent engagement component to it, as Richard says. We're inviting parents to join all of our college tours. The college and career coordinators are leading sort of college sessions, not just for students, but for parents. They are hand-holding parents in completing the FAFSA and doing FAFSA guidance. And in many cases, one of our coordinators, he's amazing, from Anacostia High. He's like, I call it 2-generation college and career sort of guidance, where he is guiding his students and their parents who didn't get it the first time around on what the process is. And as Richard is saying, when you're doing that, you're seeing different outcomes happen because the family feels comfortable about what the process looks like.
Anything
Super
else?
quick, the way you'd know, for us, one of the ways we know it works or it's working, in a year like last year where our average ACT score went down, our projected college completion rate went up. So what's amazing about this for anyone is, like, you can improve your projected college completion. You can tell your senior class projected college completion rate now. Any of us can, based on where everyone went. And so ours went up even though our ACT average went down. So we're getting value out of this that's outstripping even what we expected. So it's like we're probably up, we were up 2 years ago 4 points on a down year. One other interesting indicator, just culturally it's fun to think about, and it's sort of perverse. Success is when you have your acceptance rate, your college acceptance rates go down. You want to see those go down dramatically. So historically, like, there's this whole perverse culture, like 100% of our kids got into college. I mean, it's a joke, right? Anyone who digs under is like, that's a joke. Why are people saying this? It's a terrible thing for everyone to talk about, because what would you do to get that rate? Well, any warm application to any institution that could be open enrollment counts. So you really want to see your acceptance rate go down, which means kids are applying to a better mix of schools. And we culturally have to be comfortable with kids getting rejected. So when a child doesn't get in, which happens to everyone in the world, at some point you don't get into something you want, we're able to say, I'm so glad you pushed to go for a school. That was a stretch. So acceptance rates, and I would say at KIPP in the old days, like people would love to say, oh, my kids got in everywhere they applied. Now it's like, what did you do wrong? And that's a big issue. This is for all kids, not just KIPP. So those are indications of success to date.
Carol, do you have anything to add, or do you want to?
No, nothing to add to that. I don't have any kids that I can point to, so.
All right, so want to go ahead and open this up to the audience Q&A. Molly is coming around with a mic. Can you just quickly announce where you're from when you ask the question as well?
Hi, Carrie Wofford, former Senate Education Committee and Veterans Education Success. When you look at college scorecard and the GI Bill college comparison tool, if you have looked at that, what data points would you like to see added? And then a second unrelated question would be, are for-profit colleges on your radar at all?
I'm not the right person to answer your first question. Someone on my team would be, but it's, let me just say, the more data you guys have pushed out, the better. So anyone who wants to hide, like eventually we'll get there and we'll win, but anyone who's resisting data availability, I can't imagine what we don't want. So I'm sure we want it all, and then we figure out how to put it to use. And if I said something wrong, my team will tell me afterwards. The second thing I'd say is, yeah, we're conscious of for-profits, and the biggest issue there is just like we're conscious of cost and debt. So, one of the things that comes up when you apply is, as we talk about, it's sticker price, it's net price, it's what KIPPsters have been gapped. Specifically, what does KIPPster package look like the year before? So if you do that, interestingly enough, you actually don't even have, like, I'll be honest, like, to talk to seniors and try to explain to juniors, this is a for-profit, this is a not-for-profit, it's a little, like, esoteric. It's sort of like a public school is a public school, whether it's a charter or a district school. But if they look at it and say, wow, I'm going to have to come up with $32,000 and there's no aid for that, okay, that doesn't seem like a good choice. So it's sort of taking care of itself in the system.
Yeah. I would say for your question one, I think the more granular a data system can be, the better. That's sort of my like drum that I want to beat. But also, I think I feel that we are increasingly missing so much of the true denominator by only including first-time, full-time, and you really just aren't. You just do not have an accurate, by any means, reflection. What I would love, like unicorns and rainbows love, is if you expanded your denominator in federal national reporting to high school graduates. That's what we at DCPS internally hold ourselves to account for, right? Like, we can tell you what proportion of our graduates of the class of blah, 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 who enrolled in college, that is your denominator, then went and completed college. We don't hold ourselves to account for that, because what about the kids who should have gone to college that graduated the high school? But I have literally spent hours and hours and days and years in Facebook posts on my personal page saying, please help me, anyone, does this exist? And it doesn't. And that is so disappointing, because when you think about an actual room full of children who are in high school and thinking that so many of them, for so many reasons, as they get to college age and going to college, will not even be reflected in data that is what we think is real and true. So I think that is sort of, those are some buckets. And I really think Richard sort of hit the nail on the head. I would say, in addition to the aid, though, I would say the completion rates speak for themselves. And again, when we see our Smart College Choices campaign, we are just not including schools that don't serve our students well in a room. If a for-profit has a great DCPS graduation rate, sure, come on in.
Yeah, and we sort of, the way we approach all of these issues, whether it's, conversations around gainful employment regulations or whatever, our approach is, we ought to be looking at this for all of higher ed. I appreciate the focus on a for-profit, because it was a sector that needed that attention. I think higher ed writ large is a sector that needs that attention. There's plenty of institutions out there with abysmal completion rates that are not for profit, and given your focus on smart choices, that sort of shining a light in that level of data is important, I think, across the entire sector.
And just to go back, because I looked at my prep, in terms of your question, I don't know if this is what's in right now, but I would say, we're getting at this. If you said in the future, where would I like us to be able to go? So right now, we can do a very good job helping our KIPsters start with the right wish list, go after it, understand the financial implications, all that. It's all great. We do not have nearly as good, I think, guidance for them around predicted income. So matching the major, the field of study, which we talked earlier, to the institution, I think, is the next level. Like, I think it's less about which institutions, it's more about which majors at which institutions. I think is going to be the key next piece that I'd love to get us to. I don't think it's on people's radar screens. So there may be some place that our kids are doing well. What they're majoring in may not land well in the market. And so I'd want to make sure that there's a higher level of consciousness. And again, just to emphasize this, once you have that data, then you're talking about like a several-year process of socializing everyone to think in that new way. So the sooner that data is integrated, the better. And obviously debt loads is a big part of it, but I think we're getting at that now.
Thanks. Michael Dannenberg with Education Reform Now, which is a think tank arm of Democrats for Education Reform. I have two questions, answer either. First, love what you all are doing. And with respect to DCPS and KIPP separately, have you considered partnering with like-minded institutions, either other urban districts or neighboring districts or other charter management organizations, to multiply your impact of, say, a Smarter Choice Colleges nationally or KIPP and Achievement First approved colleges nationally? That's my first question. My second question is, there's been a lot of talk about data and the use of data to drive student choices. I'm wondering how your institutions have used data to drive choices with respect to academic programming, specifically with in mind that such a large proportion of recent high school graduates are going on to remedial education or developmental education at the post-secondary level. What are you doing with higher education data to address this problem? Challenge.
So first question, are we trying to share? Yes, we're open book with everyone. We have some explicit partnering going on right now. We're expanding that. And there's nothing we do that's proprietary, not one thing. Our Match Matters campaign, all the infrastructure, all the methodology behind it, we're willing to share. We're actually, just to give you the most extreme, San Antonio Independent School District, we're literally training their counseling team in doing exactly what we do. In rural Arkansas, where we have a high school, we had all these siblings and other families who literally, people can't believe this still, but kids didn't know you'd have to register for the ACT. So a funder came and said, will you guys actually staff the high schools and run KIPP College in these high schools so that what you're doing for your kids, you can do for all kids. So the answer is, as much as we could possibly do, we'd want to push out. In terms of what the impact is on the program design, it's a great question. I think what we're beginning to see is our KIPP College, all that learning, and our high school design and all that learning, and then the market forces out there that are evolving rapidly are probably going to come together when we think about our 2025 plan and be integrated in thinking through what does this mean for high school, what does this mean for our guidance, post-secondary guidance. And I think everything is on the table. I just want to say, I think everything will be on the table. There are a whole bunch of colleges out there that probably, or some, right, a good number, will be better off finding pathways directly into work opportunities that have better runways than what the institutions are producing. So that'll be stuff we'll be grappling with based on good data. I think more and more you're going to look at two-year programs and say, are those two-year programs fundamentally integrated into the workforce or not? So what doesn't work, our experience is that the two-year program that is designed to feed into a four-year program, we're not having success with. General rule, exceptions, of course, general rule. So that's not happening. Two-year programs that are more general ed, not having success with. So the question is the two-year program actually a program to get you into Mount Sinai, or I don't know the hospital names here, GW if they have a hospital. Like, is the 2-year program linked with GW's hospital, or is it a 2-year program that is generic? I think the future is in the former and not the latter. So there's a lot that's going to go on, and that'll feed then your high school design. Last thing I'll say, we all have to also, there's 2 things I want to be careful about. Even when I just say that, I'm excited about it. We don't want to go back to the old days where people started thinking, how do we have training programs and you know, a track for kids growing up in DC or a KIP, where KIP is, and then traditional higher ed with, you know, ivy on the walls for other kids. So there's a lot of opportunity there, but we got to make sure that the upward pressure is huge. So, you know, there's like, let's get ready to rumble. There are the 40 most selective colleges in America. 3% of the kids in those campuses are from the bottom income quartile. It's outrageous. And you know what? They should be scared. Like, they should be literally sitting there saying, how does it not become anachronistic? Literally, 40 most selective colleges, 3% from the bottom income quartile, more from the top 1% than the bottom half. So we got to do all this great innovation, and we got to put massive pressure on the most selective institutions to step up their game, because if we want the future leadership to represent what America looks like, they have a massive amount to lift to do. There are great presidents that want to do something about that. There are great boards that want to do something about it. People are starting to move, you feel it. But we have so long to go, both on the most selective as well as improving what's happening for the majority of kids in America. Not just our kids, all kids.
Can I just ask one question, Richard, on that?
Yeah.
I mean, even if they did, like, triple, quadruple that number, it still would just be such a small percentage overall of kids, right? Of low-income kids or underrepresented minorities. How do we got to have other paths for everybody. We got to have more paths, right?
We need a 100% solution. We need a 100% solution. So every kid has to have a pathway into pursue their passion, their purpose, their plan. What I will say, I don't want to let them off the hook. If we went over to Capitol Hill and said, let's take a look at the Senate and Congress, let's look at the president, let's look at the administration. What colleges did they go to? This is where power sits.
Yeah.
And they've been allowed to, and look, I went to one of them. Like, it's right now becoming a self-fulfilling situation. So it's never going to be a game of achieving all numbers, but I think when you look at institutions that are producers of people in influence and power, now we could say that's going to change, and maybe it will, but so far as the world we live in today, that has to be kept on the table so that we don't only think about solutions and get ourselves, you know, sort of put into a situation which says, well, if you're talking about kids from DCPS, the solution set is all in this one bucket. I agree it's smaller numbers, but it's very powerful numbers. I just can't not be here and not say it. So.
Well, and I'm related, unrelated. We'll just make my one soapbox statement. I think it's related, because how are you going to have kids successful in college if we have walked back significantly on what we're doing in the K through 12 space? So just take a look at state plans around ESSA and what their systems are going to look like. I mean, it is astonishing what states are goals they're setting for themselves, which is, you know, I'm going to have, you know, an 88% graduation rate, but oh, by the way, you know, 50% proficiency in reading, or, you know. Yep. So we're going to graduate everybody, but you're not going to be able to read on grade level or do math. And by the way, if you're a minority or low income or speak English as a second language or you're disabled, then you're probably even worse off. So how we're going to get kids into college and successful through with that
and the talent
approach.
Is there. I mean, that's the key thing to keep in mind. The talent is everywhere. So it isn't a matter of whether the talent's there. So Franklin and Marshall, I use as an early example. We now have 40 plus Kipsters on F&M. The university leadership decided they're going to be more competitive than ever been, but they also said, what would it take to be that? And they adopted common sense practices. They said, we're going to go for financial aid instead of merit aid. They were caught up in the U.S. news trap of using dollars to get kids with high SAT scores by giving them money and pitting college against it. So we're going to do financial aid instead of merit aid. We're going to defer our maintenance schedule a lot more. We don't need to run big surpluses. Why are we doing that if we can enroll kids here? The result is they have a more talented class than they've ever had. The institution is going to become a more profoundly, you know, selective and high impact institution. And they've quadrupled their Pell eligible kids. So this isn't like, you know, I could say here like the world should change. There's no way to do it. No, the world should change and there are ways to do it. We have 50 plus kids at Penn this year. We had none a few years ago, right? So if there's a will, we can do it. There are 14, I think, Kipster freshmen at Georgetown this year. So institutions can move. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I just don't want the solution set to lose sight of we've got incredibly talented kids from all walks of life. We need to make sure they're the most selective. Another thing, able to say, like, what is part of the solution set? We have lost the American public's belief in public higher ed. So if you say, why is this becoming more unaffordable for kids? We've lost the American public belief. We've let that happen. We've got to win back hearts and minds. People just don't think it's worth it to put money into public higher education. So our kids are expected to come up with a bigger percentage of the bill than they did one generation ago. And anyone who has a friend who went to public higher ed a generation ago would tell you, I went, they all have a story, and it cost me $800 a semester. And now it's like, 800, how is that even possible? Well, it's because costs have to be contained, but the second thing is public support. We have to figure out how to galvanize it and for people to understand what a worthwhile investment is. Sorry.
So I want to make sure that we have enough time. I think we have time for one more question. So
Hi, Walter Ochenko, Veterans Education Success. So you talked, Richard, about a little bit
please
about...
speak a little.
You talked a little bit about some of the interventions that schools use, such as making sure students get on Pell and making more grant aid available. Can you talk about other interventions that some of the schools you work with use to make sure that students actually graduate?
Great, I'll let my colleague, because I just was talking a bunch, you want to talk about partner schools or schools you like, what they're doing?
Yeah, so one of the, I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I want to just take advantage of this audience, because I feel like you have access to levers that I do not. So I can answer your question if time permits, but I want to sort of say my aspiration. I actually think, and let me pause by saying I really genuinely feel like the charter space runs circles around sort of public schools in this area, not just DCPS, but everywhere, and that is alumni engagement. When you think about, like, I have 3 kids, right? What do I want for Anna, Natalie, and Charlie? I don't want them to just graduate high school. That's not my finish line for them. I don't want them to just enroll in college. That's not my finish line. My finish line is much further down the line, right? And so I think it's very easy for K through 12 districts to say, okay, done, they graduated, and that is so counter to what one actually wants for their own child. And so the approach that we are sort of slowly pursuing, and if funders come along and are willing to support it, is again providing that intrusive support and guidance to groups of students who, based on data, we are deeming at risk of not making it through that year 1 and year 2, especially of college. That is something that we are seeing charters do and do very well. And that is something that we really want to do. We also have designed a proposal, again, pending funding, to do that for our career-bound students. So in DC, which I realize is not your typical state, over 75% of all jobs require some sort of post-secondary degree or credential. So if we have students for various and compelling reasons who are graduating high school and going straight into the workforce, they are vulnerable. They're especially vulnerable in terms of facing barriers that will prevent them from succeeding in those first few years. We believe that they need alumni coaches to support them during that period of time as well. There are things that we're doing, but in order to really drive it, that is sort of where my mind is going.
We're going to do 2 seconds. Georgia State, for anyone who wants to look up.
Yeah.
So you can look at, I gave Franklin and Marshall an example of what you would call a liberal arts example. Dramatically increased Pell. Take a look at what Georgia State's doing. Traditional public higher ed, Atlanta. Student population looks at, what are they doing? They said we have a gazillion majors. Overwhelming system. We're going to collapse this and condense this into like 9 choices. That makes much more sense for a freshman to look at. And then they took their guidance program, they pulled it out of all those departments and majors, and they centralized it. And then they're using a data early warning system. So they're in touch with you. These are the nudges, the cultural. They have counselors. They've built up a counseling team that if I'm out of class for a couple weeks, I'm getting texts, I'm getting calls. If I have a family crisis, it takes me home, and then I'm not back, and they say, why aren't you back? Well, often for first-gen kids, it could be $300 is the difference in coming back to school or not. Here's the emergency grant. What's interesting about their model, they've reduced the number of majors, they've used data so that they have a highly responsive system to individual kids through their counseling teams. They have a mini grant program to target kids in crisis. Their completion rates have gone up by 20 points, and it's positive from a cash flow standpoint. So I say this, all these people say, what can you do? You can do what Franklin Marshall's, you can do what Georgia State's doing. There are examples out there. This is not like a bridge too far. It's about will. And if we know this is what's key to the future prosperity of the country, we've got massive talent out there. How are we going to make sure it's fully realized? Just some examples to look at.
Richard, you could not have set up the second part of this event series better. So if you're interested in this kind of conversation as we continue in the next two series, the next one is going to be about what are some of the institutions like Georgia State or the Franklin and Marshalls of the world doing once you guys are getting your kids to school. Perfect. How can we make sure that they're finishing? So I wish that this conversation we had more time, but thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully this is just the start of a bigger conversation about data in higher ed. So please everyone join me in giving everyone thank you for coming. And we look forward to, you guys will all receive notification about our upcoming events. And if you have any questions, I'm sure they'll be around for a couple minutes to answer them.